One of the Navy's most famous fighter jet was nearly grounded not by enemies but by its own engines. When you think of the F-14 Tomcat, you think of speed, power, and dominance in the sky. But the truth, the jet's biggest threat came from within. Its original engines weren't just underperforming, they were unstable, dangerous, and nearly cost the Tomcat its future. And fixing that problem wasn't just an upgrade. It was one of the most critical transformations in modern fighter history. Let's break down how a jet with failing power plants became one of the most iconic aircraft ever to fly. Back in the late 1960s, when bell bottoms were cool and the Navy needed a new fighter jet, Grumman came up with the F-14 Tomcat. But every superhero needs a heart, and for the Tomcat, that meant engines. Big, powerful, supersonic engines. The Navy wanted this plane fast, so they went with what was available, the Pratt Whitney TF30 engines. These were the same engines used in the F-111, and honestly, they were never meant for a fighter like the F-14. It's like putting a minivan engine in a sports car. Yeah, it moves, but not the way you want. The TF30 engine was a compromise from day one. Navy officials knew it, Grumman engineers knew it, and soon enough, F-14 pilots would know it too. The hard way. When the F-14A took off with these TF30 engines, problems started almost immediately. The biggest issue, something called compressor stalls. When pilots make quick moves, the kind fighter pilots need to make in combat, the engines would sometimes just quit. Here's what happened. During sharp maneuvers or rapid throttle movements, airflow through the engine would get disrupted. When that happened, the compressor blades couldn't work properly. Instead of pushing air smoothly through the engine, they'd start to stall. Kind of like when you try to pedal a bike into a high gear uphill. The result, sudden power loss, sometimes total engine failure, and in the worst cases, crashes that cost pilots their lives. Between 1974 and 1981, these engine problems contributed to the loss of at least 40 F-14s. That's 40 cutting-edge, multi-million-dollar jets. And tragically, some of their pilots gone because the engines couldn't handle the job they were built for. By the late 1970s, everyone agreed. The F-14 needed better engines ASAP. The Navy first tried a solution from the original engine maker, testing Pratt & Whitney's F-401 PW400 engines in 1981. These engines were installed in the prototype F-14B, but guess what? More technical problems. Back to square one. Then came General Electric with their F-110 engines. These engines had been developed for the Air Force's F-16 Fighting Falcon, but with some tweaks, they could work for the Navy's Tomcat too. Testing began and the results were clear. The F-110 was exactly what the F-14 needed all along. The Navy was so impressed with the GE F-110 engines that they gave them the green light before they were even cleared for afterburner takeoffs. That's how much more reliable they were than the old TF-30s. It's like the difference between trusting an old clunker car versus a brand new ride. The confidence level was just that different. This engine change was so significant that it created two different generations of Tomcats. The original F-14A kept flying with the TF-30s, while the new F-14B and later F-14D got the awesome F-110 engines. When you spot a Tomcat in old photos or videos, you can actually tell which engines it has by just looking at the exhaust nozzles. Let's break down what made these engines so different, and why the F-110 was such a game changer for the Tomcat. First up, raw power. The TF30 P414A engine generated about 20,900 pounds of thrust with afterburner. Not bad, but the GE F-110 GE400 cranked out 27,000 pounds of thrust with afterburner. That's almost 30% more power. For pilots, that extra thrust meant better acceleration, higher top speed, and more energy during dogfights. But even more important was the fuel efficiency. The TF30 guzzled fuel at a rate of 255 kilograms per kilonewton-hour with afterburner, while the F-110 sipped at just 201 kilograms per kilonewton-hour. Translation: F-14B and D models could fly further on the same amount of fuel or carry more weapons for the same mission range. To put this in real numbers, an F-14 with F-110 engines at maximum afterburner burned through about 800 kilograms of fuel per minute. That's like emptying a bathtub in seconds. The TF30 would have burned even more fuel to make less power. No bueno. The reliability difference was even bigger. The TF30 was super sensitive to sudden changes. Quick stick movements could cause those deadly compressor stalls we talked about earlier. Pilots had to be super careful with their controls, which is the last thing you want when you're in a dogfight. The F-110, on the other hand, handled rapid changes with ease. Pilots could yank and bank all day long without worrying about their engines quitting. That's why Navy test pilots gave it rave reviews right from the start. One pilot said it was like going from flying with handcuffs to flying with total freedom. If you're finding this deep dive as intense as a dogfight, hit the subscribe button and drop your thoughts below. We've got way more aviation stories coming in hot. Now, let's talk about one of the coolest technical differences: the nozzle systems. The nozzle is the part at the back of the engine that controls the exhaust. Think of it like the difference between putting your thumb over a garden hose to make the water spray faster. That's basically what the nozzle does with engine exhaust. The TF30's nozzles were controlled hydraulically. The port left engine powered the combined hydraulic system, while the starboard right engine powered the flight hydraulic system. These systems adjusted the nozzles based on whether the plane was on the ground or in the air. Here's where it gets interesting. The F-14 had special sensors that detected weight on wheels when the plane was on the ground, or weight off wheels when it was flying. When on the ground, the nozzles would open wider to reduce thrust. This prevented the powerful exhaust from blowing away ground crew or equipment behind the jet. In the air, the nozzles would close up to maximize thrust, except when the afterburner was engaged. When shutting down an F-14A with TF30 engines, pilots always turned off the right engines first, then the left. This created a weird situation where one nozzle would open and one closed when the jet was parked, a signature look of the F-14A. The F-110 engines in the F-14B and D models used a more advanced electronic control system called the AFTC, Augmenter Fan Temperature Controller. This system constantly adjusted the nozzles based on throttle position, fan pressure, and whether the plane was in the air or on the ground. Much more precise. One super cool feature of the 110 engines was something called RATS, Reduced Arrestment Thrust System. When landing on an aircraft carrier, the F-14 catches an arresting wire to stop quickly. The RATS system detected when the arresting hook was down and automatically reduced engine thrust by 10%. This prevented damage to the ship's arresting gear during landings. No cap. That's some big brain engineering right there. The F-110 engines also gave the F-14 amazing new capabilities. Unlike the TF30-powered F-14A, the B and D models could launch from an aircraft carrier without using afterburners. That saved tons of fuel and extended mission range. Even more impressive, if one engine failed during catapult launch, F-14s with F-110 engines could still climb away safely. With the old TF30s, losing an engine during launch was often a death sentence. The engine change completely transformed how the F-14 operated in real-world conditions. Let's see how this played out from takeoff to landing. For carrier takeoffs, the difference was night and day. TF30-powered F-14As needed full afterburner to launch from carrier's catapult. This created a dangerous situation. If an engine failed during launch, the plane didn't have enough power to keep flying. Pilots facing this emergency had split seconds to decide whether to eject or ride the failing jet into the ocean. F-14B and D models with F-110 engines could launch without afterburners, using just regular military power. This not only saved fuel but created a crucial safety margin. If one engine quit during launch, the remaining F-110 engine had enough power to keep the Tomcat flying until the pilot could solve the problem or return for landing. In combat maneuvering, the engine differences were even more dramatic. F-14A pilots had to constantly babysit their TF-30 engines, avoiding certain maneuvers and being gentle with throttle movements. In a dogfight, that's like trying to box with one hand tied behind your back. F-14B and D pilots could push their jets to the limit without engine concerns. They could rapidly accelerate, decelerate, and change directions, all critical moves in air combat. This freedom let them focus on fighting rather than nursing their engines along. The engines even changed how the plane operated at high altitudes. The F-110-powered Tomcats could reach higher altitudes and maintain supersonic speeds more efficiently. This expanded the jet's performance envelope, making it more effective for both interception missions and bombing runs. A less obvious but equally important benefit was maintenance. The TF30 engine were notorious for requiring constant attention. Maintenance crews worked around the clock to keep them running, and parts wore out quickly. The F-110s were far more reliable, requiring less maintenance and fewer replacement parts. This meant more F-14s were ready for combat at any given time, a huge factor in real-world operations. Fuel consumption affected mission planning too. F-14As with thirsty TF-30s needed frequent refueling for long-range missions. This limited their effectiveness as fleet defenders since they might need to break off from protecting the carrier to get more gas. The more efficient F-110s allowed B&D models to stay on station longer, providing better protection for the Navy's valuable aircraft carriers. The safety improvements from the engine upgrade can't be overstated. After the switch to F-110 engines, engine-related crashes dropped dramatically. This meant saving not just expensive aircraft, but more importantly, the lives of highly trained pilots and radar intercept officers. The stories from pilots who flew both versions of the F-14 tell the tale. One F-14 pilot who flew both types said switching from the A to the B model was straight-up fire, like going from a beater to a luxury whip. Harsh burn on the TF-30, but totally accurate. During Desert Storm in 1991, both engine types were still in service. F-14As with TF-30s were limited in the missions they could fly, while F-14Bs with F-110s took on the toughest assignments. The B models could launch with heavier bomb loads, fly farther, and respond quickly to emerging threats. When every mission counts, that's a massive advantage. The F-14D, with its F-110 engines and digital avionics, represented the final evolution of the Tomcat. These jets were so capable that they remained valuable assets for the Navy until their retirement in 2006. The original F-14As would never have lasted that long without their engine upgrades. There's a famous story about naval aviators about how you could tell which model of F-14 was launching just by the sound. The TF-30-powered F-14As made a distinctive bark when going to afterburner, followed by a smoky launch. The F-110-powered B&D models had a cleaner, more powerful roar. Sailors would say, "That's a Bravo," or "That's a Delta," just from the sound signature. The engine upgrade program wasn't cheap. Each F-110 engine cost millions, but the Navy determined it was worth every penny. Not only did they save money and reduce crashes and maintenance, but they got essentially a new fighter jet without having to design one from scratch. In today's dollars, that engine upgrade program saved billions compared to developing an entirely new aircraft. Maintenance crews had their own perspective. One chief who worked on both engines said, "The TF-30s kept us busy 24/7. When we switched to F-110s, I actually got to sleep occasionally." He was only half joking. The newer engines required about 40% less maintenance time, allowing crews to focus on other systems that improved combat effectiveness. One of the most telling statistics involved the F-14's accident rate. In the first decade of Tomcat operations with TF-30 engines, the Class A mishap rate, accidents causing death, permanent disability, or major aircraft damage, was 6.1 per 100,000 flight hours. After the F-110 engines became widespread, that rate dropped to 2.4, less than half. That's real progress measured in pilots' lives saved. The saga of the F-14's engine shows us something important. Even the most beautiful aircraft design is only as good as what powers it. The Tomcat started life with an engine that held it back, limited what it could do, and even endangered the brave pilots who flew it. But with the right heart, the F-110 engine, the F-14 finally became the jet it was always meant to be. This upgrade wasn't just a technical change. It was a transformation that saved lives, extended the Tomcat's career by decades, and cemented its place as one of the most iconic fighter jets in history. Sometimes, the real hero isn't what you see on the outside, but what's powering things from within. For the F-14 Tomcat, those GE F-110 engines turned a troubled fighter into a legend. The tea is hot and the receipts are clear. Engines make or break an aircraft. If you've enjoyed this absolute banger about F-14's engines, smash that subscribe button and notification bell to catch our next deep dive into aircraft tech. And drop a comment below. Would you rather have flown an F-14A with original engines or waited for the improved B&D models? Let us know. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.